we are about to start now, and we want to. We have a very long program. They said load shedding is at 10 o'clock. So we may decide to go on till 10 o'clock. I'm joking. So we'll start off this evening's procedure with a recitation of the Holy Quran by Hafiz Muhammad Bauda.
واعتصموا بحبل الله جميعا ولا تفرقوا واذكروا نعمة الله عليكم إذ كنتم أعداء فألف بين قلوبكم فأصبحتم بنعمته إخوانا وكنتم على شفا حفرة من النار فأنقذكم منها كذلك يبين الله لكم آياته لعلكم تهتدون ولتكن منكم أمة يدعون إلى الخير ويأمرون بالمعروف وينهون عن المنكر وأولئك هم المفلحون ولا تكونوا كالذين تفرقوا واختلفوا من بعد ما جاءهم البينات وأولئك لهم عذاب عظيم يوم تبيض وجوه وتسود وجوه فأما الذين اسودت وجوههم ففي رحمة الله وأما الذين اسودت وجوههم أكفرتم بعد إيمانكم فذوقوا العذاب بما كنتم تكفرون وأما الذين ابيضت وجوههم ففي رحمة الله هم فيها خالدون تلك آيات الله نتلوها عليك بالحق وما الله يريد ظلما للعالمين ولله ما في السماوات وما في الأرض وإلى الله ترجع الأمور.
In the name of Allah, the most beneficent, the most merciful. O you who believe, fear Allah as He should be feared, and do not die except as in the state of Islam. And hold firmly to the rope of Allah altogether, and do not become divided. And remember the favor of Allah upon you when you were enemies and He brought your hearts together, and you became by His favor brothers and sisters. And you were on the edge of the pit of the fire, and He saved you from it. Thus does Allah make clear to you His verses that you may be guided. And let there arise out of you a nation or a people inviting to all that is good, enjoining what is right and forbidding what is wrong, and those will be the successful ones. And do not be like the ones who became divided and deferred after the clear proofs had come to them, and those will have a great punishment. On the day, some faces will turn white, and some faces will turn black. As for those whose faces turn black, did you disbelieve after you believed? Then taste the punishment for what you used to reject. But as for those whose faces will turn white, they will be within the mercy of Allah. They will abide therein eternally. These are the verses of Allah. We recite them to you in truth, and Allah wants no injustice to the world. To Allah belongs whatever is in the heavens and whatever is on the earth. And to Allah will all matters be returned. Sadaqallahu al-Azim.
Jazakallah Muhammad Fawada for that beautiful and very relevant recitation of the Holy Quran. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. On behalf of the Islamic Forum, it gives us great pleasure to invite you today to celebrate the life of our dear brother Ebrahim Jadwat. And your turnout today is a testimony to his popularity. Normally, we have tributes and memorials and celebrate the life of people who have deceased. But we decided that we want to pay a tribute to Ebrahim because he's touched every one of us in this room in many different ways at different points in time, and some of us over a long period of time. So every single one of you here have a deep connection with Ebrahim, and that's why we invited you here to celebrate his life and to pay tribute for the enormous sacrifices that he has made, and which is why many of us are here today. The verses that Hafiz Muhammad have recited, وَلْتَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ وَيَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ, that epitomizes the life of Ebrahim. Let there arise out of you a band of people inviting to all that is good, inviting to all that is good and forbidding what is wrong. That's the epitome of the life of Ebrahim Jadwat. From the time that he became conscious of his responsibilities towards his ummah, that was his life's mission, to invite people to good and to forbid his evil. So thank you, Muhammad, for a very relevant recitation, which I think is perfectly suited for this kind of audience. I want to take an opportunity particularly to welcome Ibrahim's family, Ebrahim or Babu as you all know him. I also recently learned he was in the past known as Brian, but we'll talk about that just now. But I want to, his brother is here, AK, and his sister as well, or sisters, as well as his nephews and nieces. Thank you very much for honoring our invitation, and it is really a pleasure for us to have you here today. So our program is not a very long one. It depends how long Ebrahim decides to speak for. And you know he can speak for long. Initially when I asked him to speak, he said he wants to speak for 2 hours. And I said, no, not 2 hours, maybe less than that. And he said 1 hour. I said, no, not even 1 hour. You've got 20 minutes to speak. So load shedding is at 10 o'clock. We've got to finish by 10. So it all started in, mine is going to be a very brief PowerPoint presentation. The Prophet ﷺ said that whoever is not grateful to people is not grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And here we want to show our gratefulness to Ebrahim for all that he's done to us in fulfillment of this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that we need to be grateful to people, to be grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ebrahim Jadwat was born on the 2nd of March 1946. You can see a picture of Durban in 1946. He came from a family who was very well established in a retail trade. His great-grandfather, Ahmad Jadwat, arrived in the mid-1980s. 1880s. And the family businesses are all well-known, iconic names in Durban, Ideals and Models, and they dominated the corner of Grey and Queen Street. Ibrahim spent his formative years in Stamford Hill, which is a few kilometers north of Durban. Most of you know the Greyville area, which was a mixed race area. And like all of us, he played with kids of different race groups at that point in time, Indians and Coloreds and working class. And at that time, his name was known as Brian. Of course, that subsequently changed to Babu, but we all knew him as Ebrahim. But in the Islamic movement in MYM, we knew him as EJ. Everybody knew who you were talking about when you spoke about EJ. And this impacted on his sense of philanthropy and social welfare of children that he was in contact with who came to school empty-handed, empty stomachs, many of them with torn clothes, with 10 or 15 people living in a single room. And he said, I visited them, and some of my close friends were there. And because they couldn't afford to wear shoes, my cousin and I, Farouk, his cousin, didn't wear shoes for up to 2 years in solidarity with those who were unable to afford shoes. His school years also raised Ebrahim's religious awareness, as his classmates often picked on his religion. And this was an interview done by Ghulam Wahed on 19th of October 2017. In early life, Ebrahim was very involved in sports, and you can see here he was involved in karate, in martial arts. His father was in fact a keen cricketer, and maybe his family can tell us more about that. And he was also a very prominent sports administrator. And Ebrahim played soccer with boys of different ages and races from a very early age, and became very conscious of him being Muslim. So what changed the life of this young boy who grew up in Greyville, like any ordinary person, playing soccer, going to school, going barefoot, showing solidarity with his fellow students? Well, one day he recounted an incident when he and his friends had gone to the cinema. And when he came out, the adhan was going on. And he told his friends that I'm going for salah. And for him it was like a new day, a newborn baby, a new whatever. And he told them, you can come with me if you want. And they all came. They sat in the back. I made my salah, these are his words. I was no more Brian. I became Ebrahim and later Babu. It was a defining moment in his life. That was the epiphany in his life that changed his life from then onwards. And by the age of 16 or 17, Ebrahim charted a completely new course. The boys that he played with were no more part of his life, although he would occasionally meet them. One of his greatest stimulation, his intellectual and spiritual stimulation, was his father. And I'm sure most of you will remember his father. I do remember him very well when we used to have meetings at Ebrahim's house, ExCom meetings every Monday evenings. And his father often used to be there. His father was a very keen intellectual, and he read a lot. He read the writings of the Ikhwan, of Maududi, Sayyid Amir, Sayyid Qutb, and all the great intellectuals in our tradition. And his favorite was the poet Muhammad Iqbal. And there were always discussions taking place at the dinner tables. And Ebrahim was deeply influenced by this intellectual stimulation and discussions that he had with his father. He attended madrasa at the corner of First Avenue and Market Street, close to the Greyville School. The madrasa was run by 3 women who taught children to read the Quran. And he said, I never understood how I finished the Quran faster than everybody else. And this was a gift that he had. And I remember that box of chocolates I got, but the Quran made no sense to me. Because at that point, the Quran was just read ritually. People did not have a deep understanding of the Quran. There was no formal Quranic education in terms of understanding its text and its meanings and its philosophy. Ebrahim then came into contact with members of the Arabic Study Circle. And Arabic Study Circle was, at that point in time, a very progressive organization. And my father had spent his entire life working with the Arabic Study Circle, whose primary aim was to promote the study of Arabic in schools and at university levels. And in fact, the Arabic Study Circle was very instrumental in the establishment of the Islamic and Arabic Studies department at the University of Dublin-Westfield. And in fact, I remember as a young boy, my father and his colleagues, Dr. Mal, Mr. Belim, Mr. Mohammadi, Mr. Bobat, all of them are marhum now. They used to go house to house campaigning to get Arabic as a subject for matriculants in school. And of course, that is now a reality. And this was the hard work of the forefathers of the MYM, who was the Arabic Study Circle. Now, 3 of these students was Hafiz Timol, Abdullah Didat, who is the brother of Ahmad Didat, and Sulaiman Umar. And you can see the pictures here. That's my dad, Sulaiman Umar, Hafiz Timol, and Abdullah Didat. And this photograph was taken before I was born, so that's more than 60 years ago. And these young gentlemen at that time made a deep impression and impact on the thinking of Ebrahim Jadwat. He used to attend Quranic classes in Madrasa Arcade, as well as the library, which was later on in Victoria Street. And this made a deep imprint on his mind. And I think that also the turning point, so 3 of these students went to Al-Azhar to study Arabic, to come back and promote Arabic in South Africa. But because of the war situation and many unrest at that point in time in Egypt, they came back and they established a newspaper called Al-Mujaddid. I still have copies of Al-Mujaddid. And this was a very progressive Islamic newspaper, which was probably the first newspaper in Durban, Islamic newspaper or Muslim newspaper, that looked at various aspects of society, encouraged the study of Quran with understanding, and of course Ebrahim was very much part of this. Another turning point in Ebrahim's life was his father, he left school midway through standard 11 to join the family business. But in 1966, his father sent him for a tour of Europe. He went to France, Germany, Sweden, Norway, Italy, and Switzerland. And that's where, instead of having a party or a jol, he came into contact with members of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin. And one of the person he met was this person here, who is the father of Tariq Ramadan. He is Sayyid Ramadan. He was the son-in-law of the founder of the Ikhwan al-Muslimin in Egypt, Hassan al-Banna. He was the son-in-law of Sheikh Hassan al-Banna. And Ebrahim met him. And he met many other people as well when he was overseas and came into contact with them. And this also deeply influenced his thinking. And then he toured the United States of America in 1971. And he was awestruck by the African American Muslims. He was inspired by their discipline, their understanding, their clarity. The Quran was the heart of their social awareness. You could even feel that impeccable character, their steadfastness, their belief in what they felt strongly, even if there was some deviation. So these were some of the defining moments in the life of Ebrahim Jadwat. Going to madrasa, hearing the adhan, going to mosque, meeting members of the Arabic study circle, listening to a very different Islam that we were used to, a ritualistic Islam based just on the 5 pillars. Here was a group that was looking at Islam in a very holistic way, as a complete way of life, who encouraged the study of Arabic and the study of the Quran. He went overseas, he went to Europe and America, and instead of just touring, he was making contact with the leading intellectuals and activists from different parts of the world. And that's when the MYM was formed. The MYM was formed in 1971. And in fact, at the first meeting, a preliminary meeting of the MYM, before the formal meeting, Ebrahim Jadwat was not there. For some reason, he wasn't there. And in fact, my father nominated him to be on the steering committee of the MYM. Advocate A.B. Muhammad was the first president of the MYM. Present at that meeting were people like the late Ghulam Hussain Vanka. I don't know how many of you knew him, but he was an iconic person who had established the Islamic Propagation Center with Sheikh Ahmad Didat, and they had their offices in Madrasa Arcade. And as a young boy, we spent many hours. The Imtiaz Jatam used to also work there. And after school, we used to go and spend time in this office in Madrasa Arcade, learning from Mr. Vanka, from Mr. Didat. And so this group of IPCI people, Arabic Study Circle, and the young activists like A.B. Muhammad, Ebrahim Jadwat, led to the formation of the Muslim Youth Movement. What was the connection between Ebrahim and A.B. Muhammad? Well, they were in the same school from grade 1 to grade 8. And while A.B. Muhammad was the speaker, the intellectual who could hold an audience with his eloquence, Ebrahim was the foot soldier. He did all the work. He went town to town. He started establishing the branches. He started organizing conventions. And there's an occasion when the road was not passable at As-Salam, and most of you are familiar with As-Salam, and that's the history on its own. Ebrahim actually got down, started digging, and started laying cement to get the road going. He was the backbone of the MYM, the main person in many aspects, whereas A.B. Muhammad was the figurehead of the MYM. The MYM went through many different phases. The first was the formative phase, very active in the community. Ebrahim went town to town, not only in KZN, but throughout the country, the length and breadth of the country. The MYM spread like wildfire. Throughout the country, there were branches in every town. Very active in conventions. We used to get, in those days, in 1970s, thousands of people attending our conventions. There were outreach programs, branches, and of course, at that early point in time, the establishment of Al-Qalam, which was the first Muslim national newspaper to be established by the Muslim Youth Movement. And the other person that was instrumental in the formation of Al-Qalam, or the establishment of Al-Qalam, was the marhum Yusuf Nazir, or Joe Nazir as he was called. Then of course, South Africa around the 1970s went through political turmoil. Most of you are familiar with the Soweto riots and the Soweto uprisings. And many Muslim activists were involved in the struggle against apartheid and in the struggle for liberation. Some of us were in school, we were involved in boycotts, we were involved in protest meetings. And there was a whole generation of young Muslims that were getting sucked into the liberation movement. And this is where the MYM saw an opportunity. And they invited Dr. Jamal Badawi. And this was an ITP, or convention, that we had in 1976. And this was a turning point in the history of the MYM, in that for the first time, a Muslim organization was formed for Muslim activists to have a platform in which to fulfill their political aspirations. At that point in time, Muslim activists were joining the Congress movement, the South African Communist Party, the Black Consciousness Movement, or the PAC. And this was the first time in history that Muslim activists had a home from which, and with the basis of which they could use for their political activism. And many political activists were then emerged from this program. And one of the, in fact, participants at this ITP was marhum Sheikh Ahmad Qasim, who had spent many years on Robben Island. And the other person that was deeply influenced by this ITP was Dr. Hafez Rashid Omar. He had spent months in detention because of political activity. He was just released from prison, and here he was invited to this ITP by Ebrahim Jadwat, and of course Ebrahim Bardeen, who was active in Cape Town at that time. Hassan Solomons, who was the member of parliament for the ANC after the first democratic election, and many, many other activists. In fact, the Call of Islam was also an offshoot of the MYM. People like Farid Isaac, Ibrahim Rasool, and many others, their first home was the MYM. But because they had a calling and a close affiliation to the Congress movement, they left the MYM and formed the Call of Islam, which then became an organ of the Congress movement. So this was a very important phase of the MYM where we got involved in political activism. But it was also a phase in which many organizations were formed. And we used to call the MYM Ummul Haraka, the mother of the movement. And many organizations were formed, like the IMA, and Ghulam will speak about that, the IDM, Ibrahim Dada is here, Sanzef, Iqbal Sabat is here, Impress, and of course the Islamic Center Trust, which basically purchased a property in Queen Street, just opposite the masjid, the Queen Street Masjid or Jummah Masjid. And that became the headquarters of the MYM, as well as the MSA. And all our meetings and activities used to be at that venue in 156 Queen Street in Durban. It was purchased through the help of Ebrahim and foreign donors. So there were two things that happened in the second phase of the movement.
And Yusuf Patel.
And of course Yusuf Patel is here today. So the ideological phase was a very important phase. The expansion phase was very important. But unfortunately, after liberation, 1994, or around there, 1992, many of the old stalwarts were told to go off, to jump off the bus. There was a disconnect between the young lions of the MYM and the older generation of the MYM, in that the younger generation wanted more political activism, and felt that the older generation were not active enough and were not doing enough. And then this dichotomy happened, and in fact it led to many of us leaving the MYM and joining other organizations like Islamic Forum and many others. But that's a story to be told on another day. Today it's about Ebrahim. So this is a photograph of Ebrahim with Mahmoud Musa, who was also he came from also a merchant class family, who played a very pivotal role in the formation of MYM. He was present at all the early meetings, also played a very important role in the promotion of the translation of Muhammad Asad's Quran into English. And I remember the Qurans were actually stored in his warehouse, and I used to go and fetch them for my father whenever they were going on a road trip to promote Muhammad Asad's translation. So this was a very early photograph during the formative phase. You can see a very young Ebrahim there. So the first phase was camps, conventions, and the other very important aspect of, so one of the first speakers at our convention, and I was a young boy at that time, this was in 1974, I was 14 years old, was Ahmad Sakar. And he played also a very important role in giving us direction and also, our attachment to the Quran and understanding of Quran and so on. And I clearly remember him speaking at Orient Hall. Hall was full of people, and he made us all pledge that from this day onwards, we all must read Quran every day with understanding. The first guest at the MYM convention was in 1972, was Maulana Fazlur Rahman Ansari. I was 12 years old, I still remember the convention. Ebrahim was one of the main movers and shakers of that convention. It was a mammoth event. There were thousands of people that came to As-Salam. And of course, in those days, As-Salam was far away. The distance seemed to be much greater than today. It was far away, the roads were impassable, and there was very little infrastructure. Despite that, Ebrahim had put up marquees, and everybody was taken care of, meals, and we spent 3 or 4 days together at that convention and many, many other conventions after that, which we can spend a lot of time speaking about, but we don't have the time for that. One of the other critical parts or features that Ebrahim was involved with was this whole aspect of da'wah. This was a neglected aspect of our community in the 1960s and 1970s, in that Islam largely remained an Indian religion or a Malay religion, both in Natal, Transvaal, and of course Malay in Cape Town. And it was in fact Ebrahim through the MYM that led to da'wah being taken to the townships. And many centers were established in the townships. And he was instrumental in the formation of the Islamic Center in Kwamashu. Our late brother Idris was involved, Marhum Suleiman, Lokat, my father, many other people were involved. And of course this became the blueprint for other townships. And Islam then started spreading rapidly in the townships. And of course this led to the formation of, and we felt that, that this whole aspect of dawah needs special attention, which is why the MYM formed the Islamic Dawah movement, which was then headed by Ibrahim Dada, who is still at the helm of the Dawah movement. And now he's got 40, 50 centers throughout the world. Thousands of people have accepted Islam through the Islamic Dawah movement. So you can see the impact that the Muslim Youth Movement and Ibrahim Jadwat had in the early phases of the Islamic movement. So Dawah was very important. You can see pictures of Kwamashu. These were pictures taken from very early on in the formative stages of the Kwamashu and Intuzuma Muslim Association. And in fact, that particular cohort of Muslims from Kwamashu held very prominent positions in government, in commerce. Some of them are executives of banks. So it was a very important target audience for Dawah in our community. So we spoke about camps, conventions, Dawah, but Ibrahim's reach went beyond South Africa. And in fact, he established the Southern Africa Islamic Youth Conference, which was a conglomeration of Islamic organizations from Southern Africa. So the countries that were involved was Zambia, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and in fact Mosin was a product of SAIYC, and in fact that's how That's how Ebrahim met him, but maybe Mohsin can tell us more about it. We don't have time to go into details of all these different organizations that Ebrahim was involved with. The other person that was very involved with us, you can see Ebrahim here. Who's that? Who can forget him? Who can forget our brother Qasim? May Allah have mercy on him and forgive all his sins. Grant him Jannatul Firdaus. Qasim was a champion of Islam amongst the Zulu nation and used to beg us. And of course, he wasn't a politician. He wasn't politically active. He wasn't politically conscious. And all he wanted us to do was convert the king to Islam. And that was his constant mantra at every meeting that we went. Take Islam to the king. Take Islam to the Zulu nation. And of course, he will be very happy to know that thousands and thousands of people have now accepted Islam at the hands of Muslims. There was also a very close collaboration with the MSA. So all these organizations used to work together, SAIYC, MSA, MYM. And of course, this man was instrumental. Who is that? Dr. Ahmad Tutunji. Ebrahim had met him very early on through WAMI. Of course, that's another story on its own. And of course, we make dua for brother Ahmad Dadabai. He passed away 2 days ago. We make dua for him. Allah grant him Jannatul Firdaus. He was also a stalwart of the Muslim youth movement. He worked full time for us. He used to work at the office, always a smile at all the camps and conventions. He was the backroom boy. Always did all the hard work. Never took credit for anything. That was Ahmad Dadabai. And Allah grant him Jannatul Firdaus and grant him the highest status in Jannah. Sorry, this is Ahmad Dadabai. And of course, this man as well, who knows him? That's Ebrahim Ahmad. Ebrahim Ahmad used to work through Ebrahim's offices. He used to have a desk in his office where Ebrahim, Mr. Ahmad, we used to call him Mr. Ahmad. And Mr. Ahmad was instrumental in the coordination of the SAIYC, the Southern Africa Islamic Youth Conferences. And I think there were 3 or 4 conferences. I was able to attend one of them in Malawi. That also was a game changer because one of the participants at that conference was Qasim Chilumpa, who would later on become the Minister of Justice in the government of Malawi. So you can see that there were wide ramifications for the kind of work that we did in those days. MYM was also very instrumental in the formation of the Islamic Medical Association as well as the Association of Muslim Accountants and Lawyers. And you can see photographs of Ebrahim with, who's this? Ahmad Al-Qadi. The hospital is named after him. That's Dr. Ahmad Al-Qadi, who was at the inaugural meeting of the IMA. I was a student at that time. I think Ghulam, 1979. I was a second year student at that time, or first year student. So this was at the inaugural meeting, Dr. Khan, and this is Dr. Shaukat Token. So these were all the stalwarts of the Islamic Medical Association, and now it's an organization on its own with thousands of members, offices in every province. You can see the wide ramifications of the effect of the work of the Islamic movement, largely spearheaded by Ebrahim Jadwat. Of course, Amal, you can see Dr. Khurshid Ahmad and many of the other stalwarts of the MYM, Muhammad Amra, Suleiman Lockhart, as well as Anwar Belim. So these were some of the people that were involved in IMA as well as Amal. So Ebrahim's contributions, in summary, was the formation of the MYM and its various branches that became known as the Islamic movement. He was the driving force of the MYM. And he was very much part of the MYM until he was told to get off the bus in 1992. He also formed the SAIYC, but many of you may not know that prior to Ebrahim catapulting Ahmad Didat onto the international stage, Ahmad Didat was largely unknown internationally. And it was Ebrahim Jadwat that introduced Ahmad Didat to a foreign audience. That's a book on its own, and if you read Ahmad Didat's biography, it's all there. I suggest every one of you read it. Ebrahim was largely instrumental in exposing, taking Ahmad Didat to many of the philanthropists in the Gulf states as well as Saudi Arabia. And of course, he became known as an international icon in the field of dawah. And of course, Ebrahim also became a trustee of the IPCI when Ahmad Didat passed away. And of course, I mentioned the Islamic Center Trust. So I'm going to make it a bit personal now. I was exposed to the Muslim youth movement as a young boy through my father, and of course, it was just an ordinary boy going to camps, not showing much interest in MYM. And I went for my first conference in 1976 because we were getting politically active. My father was worried I was going to become a communist. I was reading Das Kapital. So he sent me to a camp in Mauritius, largely instigated by Ebrahim Jadwat. And this was a student Islamic movement in Mauritius. And a whole delegation of MYM activists went, Abdullah Osman. And my father sent me because his closest friend, Ibrahim Mahida, was going with. So he said, go with him, he'll look after you. Yusuf Kaji and many others. Some of you may be in the audience now, I can't remember, it was a long time ago. And that was in 1976. I was a high school student. And that's when I picked up a book when I was browsing through a bookshop. It was an autobiography of Malcolm X, and that changed my life. It was banned at that time. I smuggled it into the country. When I came back, I just, hid it in my bag. And of course, read it when I came back, and then started, reading more about Malcolm X. And of course, that influenced me tremendously. In 1979, I was formally recruited into the MYM by Abu Bakr Asmal and Suleiman Lokat when we all moved together to Reservoir Hills. So they joined me they asked me to join the Reservoir Hills Halqa, and I became part of the Halqa. And within months, they took me to a camp in As-Salam, very small camp. We were probably 20 people or 30 people. And Ebrahim was the first speaker at that camp, and he had a deep imprint in my life. He spoke about Tawheed, and it was the first time that I understood Tawheed in its comprehensiveness. Muhammad Amra spoke about Risala, closeness to the Prophet ﷺ. And of course, it was very different from the usual talks that you hear in the masjids and in the madrasas. Riyaz Jamal, I saw Nazir here. Nazir is here. His father spoke about jihad and the whole concept of jihad and the comprehensiveness of jihad. And these are talks I remember. This was in 1976. I still remember those talks. Ebrahim, you've had a deep imprint on my life, and I'm sure many others in this audience as well. One of the things that Ebrahim was also very strong about was the opposition to apartheid. And I remember when we organized all those massive rallies in Orient Hall and elsewhere, we didn't want to join any of the political movements. We felt that Islam was our platform and we would use our own platforms to fight apartheid. And we had our own meetings to fight the tricameral parliament. Ebrahim was very active in that. He supported us, he joined us, and he was the pillar of strength that we could always rely on when we needed resources. I also remember an incident that I would prefer to forget, but when a particular sheikh, so-called sheikh, came to this country, Murabit, and he was saying, derogatory things about the Islamic movement, about Maududi and Sayyid Qutb and Sheikh Hassan al-Banna, and these were all deviants and so on. We actually disrupted the meeting. Ebrahim was the first one to stand and disrupt the meeting. He led the charge. So he was amongst us. He was in the trenches with us all the time, in all these different struggles that we were having. But one of the things that made him different from everybody else, Ebrahim was not the only one in the MYM, was not the only one in the Islamic movement. There were many others. Shaukat Tokan, Muhammad Amra, Suleiman Lokat. I can go on and on with the names. But Ebrahim was our interface with the global Islamic movement. He kept us in touch with the Ikhwan, with the Jamaat-e-Islami, with the Islamic Revolution in Iran. In fact, the Islamic Revolution in Iran was in 1979. And through Ebrahim's contacts, we were invited to go to Iran in 1980. I was a medical student and I was about to write exams and I couldn't go. And many of our brothers, about 20 or 30 of them went. I think some of them are in this audience. Harun, you went. They went to Iran, they spent a month in Iran, they met Imam Khomeini, they even made Hajj with the Iranian delegation. They spent 2 months and came back, which is why I couldn't go. I would have lost a year at university. And of course, I was always envious of them. But he was our man with the global Islamic movement. Ebrahim was our contact. And many of the guests that we got, Marhum Ismail Farouqi, Ahmad Sakar, Ahmad Tutunji, Jamal Barzanji, Jamal Badawi, were through the contacts that Ebrahim had harvested over a period of time. He met these people, he traveled overseas, and he kept us in contact with the global Islamic movement. He was also a very avid reader. Give him a book and he will read it and ask for more. He keeps on asking me for books. and I'm still supplying him with books all the time. It's an active mind, a critical mind, and always a pleasure to engage with. And he can speak on any topic. It can be sports, it can be politics, it can be religion, and he can interact with people young and old. That's one of the characteristics of Ebrahim. This is a unique photograph which was taken during the 40th anniversary of the Muslim Youth Movement many years ago. And these were all the presidents of the MYM. And you can see people from different diverse backgrounds, from different parts of the country. And this is what Ebrahim brought about, social cohesion, people from different backgrounds, with only one purpose in mind, to invite people to good and to forbid evil. So I'm just going to go through some photographs now. This is the Southern Islamic Youth Conference in Malawi. This is a meeting at Yusuf Patel's house. You can see Ebrahim, Marhum Muhammad Amra. This was a meeting, you can see Ebrahim Musa, who is a professor at Notre Dame University. He's a professor of Islamic studies. And these were some of the people that the Muslim Youth Movement produced, people that were intellectuals as well. Rashid Omar is a PhD, Abdul Qadir Tayyib, head of Islamic studies at UCT, and many, many others. Even Farid Isak, we may have disagreements with him. He was the head of Islamic studies at UJ. These were all, in some way or the other, products of the Muslim Youth Movement. In fact, even Mohsin, who was a professor of Islamic studies, was a product of the Southern Africa Islamic Youth Movement, involved with WAMI. In fact, I had first met him at a conference in Kenya, and of course he subsequently came to South Africa and stayed here after that. So these were meetings that we used to have. Imam Sepe, also very active in the movement. You can see Ghulam Tutla was involved with the Changa. Yusuf, you didn't expect that.
That's not me.
You didn't expect that, Yusuf.
That's not me.
So Ebrahim was also a matchmaker. And in fact, Yusuf found his spouse through Ebrahim Jadwat. Ebrahim Jadwat introduced Jamila to Yusuf. And it was all history after that. But you know, behind every great man is a more powerful force. And that person was Rashida. And we are disappointed that she's not here today. She's in Cape Town. We tried very hard to get her here. But Rashida made all the sacrifices. People used to be in her house. People used to live in their house. People used to be fed in her house. She supported Ebrahim every way, in every possible way. And always with a smile, always welcoming us to her house. Her house was open to the Islamic movement. Guests from overseas, guests from local, meetings all the time. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless her, grant her good health, for all that she sacrificed for all of us, and for all the good things that she's done for us. Ebrahim, without Rashida, you would not have been able to do all the things that you did. It was through her sacrifices, and we want you to convey to her our appreciation and thanks for all that, for all her contributions, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept it. I want to pay gratitude to Ghulam Wahid for sharing some of the materials with me. He's busy writing a book on the MYM. For Yusuf Patel, who shared some of the photographs, especially the last one. Anwar Hussain also shared some of his photographs with me. For Mariam Motala, who basically set up this hall. My wife, who also was involved in the planning of this meeting and the execution of many of the things that you see here. Mariam Amra, Jamila Vara, and many others who made this meeting possible. Ebrahim, we owe you a debt of gratitude for all that you've done for us. Our next speaker is going to be Dr. Ghulam Hussain. Ghulam doesn't need an introduction. He's known to all of us. He's a stalwart of the Islamic movement. He's a founder member of the Islamic Medical Association, a lifelong member of the Muslim Youth Movement, a founder of the As-Salam School as well, and many other activities that he's involved with. So Ghulam, we give you as much time as you want to speak about Ebrahim and your experiences with him.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم. I think Ahmad has put Ebrahim on a pedestal. Now I'll have to bring it down a little bit. I can say what I want, he can't hear.
He purposely speaks very softly.
The first time I met Ebrahim was in 1979, the latter part of the year. I had been living in Queen Street from 1954. Ideals, where Ebrahim was the corner of the Grey Street, Queen Street, the mosque building. I was a regular Musalli, but I never met him. I'll never forget the first day. It was a Saturday. It was the day after an intake, a surgical intake in King Edward. And those who are surgeons will know what a surgical intake is. You are exhausted, you're tired. You come home, you want to sleep. And I get two of my students came to visit me. And they said, we want to take you to a meeting. I'm tired. I said, I'm not interested. They said, no, MY meeting. I said, oh, I don't want to come at all. They insisted. They were very persuasive. And so they took me to this meeting at Orient School. And that's when I first met Ebrahim, with Mahmoud Musa. They had gone to America to attend the MSA conference. And there they met members of the IMA of North America. And they came with this idea, we must have an IMA in South Africa. So they said, okay. And they looked around, there were no doctors in IMA. But they had a few medical students. So they spoke to the students. And I don't know what made them think that I would be it, because because I used to go to the mosque, I suppose, you know. So they were very persuasive, and they took me to this meeting, and that's where I first met him with Mahmoud Musa. And they talked about the experience and the need to form the IMA. And like a stupid man that I used to be, you know, I opened my mouth and I lost my sleep of every Saturday after that. The thing I remember about him then was that he used to dress really dapper. Suit, tie, matching hanky, sleeves showing the right amount, shoes, brill cream, whole tough. The funny part is, in those days he only had one home. Now he's got three. Maybe a lesson for us. Huh? In 1979, we invited Dr. Ahmad Al-Qadi to help us form the IMA in South Africa. We had a problem. When we tried to form it in 74, there was a lot of opposition, especially from the Congress movement. South Africa was a country that had been divided racially. And their contention was that we are creating further division by bringing Islam into it. And they couldn't understand what we were trying to tell them. That belief, faith, is a very powerful force in our body. And we can use this faith to be very destructive, as Hitler did, as the BJP is doing, or you can use it in a very constructive way. But they couldn't understand that. So we were not, and we were not qualified, and we didn't have the ability to convince people. When I met Al-Qadi in America and I talked to him about it, he said, no problem. I said, no, you don't understand. In South Africa, we are racially divided. He says, no problem. I said, will you come and help us? He said, no problem. So we invited him in 79, and that he accepted the invitation. And he was going to come down. And suddenly we realized that we had a bunch of people living in Durban. We want to form a national body. How do you do that? We had no contact with anybody else in the country. And that's when Ebrahim came in. And Ebrahim helped. He said, no problem. And he picked up the phone. In those days, not the phone like we do today. You've got a phone, you've got to dial the exchange, you've got to ask for a number in Joburg, for a number in Cape Town, a number in Pretoria. So in Joburg, he got Abdullah Osman, fantastic person, a great movement man. What a great loss we have lost. Produced a Friday, the khutbahs every day, every Friday. And an unbelievable person. And he arranged meeting at the Wits University, at Barrack Manat Hospital, Roshni, Glens, Pretoria, Springs, Cape Town, Ebrahim Baldi. And even put us in contact at that time with Rafiq Khan in Port Elizabeth, mullahs in Ladysmith, and I don't know who it was in Newcastle, but we got people in touch. Now we could take the man around the country and form branches, and that's exactly what we did. And this is where that was the birth of the IMA in South Africa in 1979. And so he's played a very active role in that sense, if you look at everything about it. And we are very grateful to him for that. Another thing about Ebrahim is that he's a very stubborn guy. Dogged. We attend his breakfast meeting, because he loves to talk. And to get to him, you've got to phone him. He doesn't have WhatsApp. Now this was very irritating for some of the guys, because to phone Ebrahim on your phone, you could have 10-minute lecture, because he talks. So they want to give him an engineer. So I think they engineered that his phone be stolen. And so they got him a phone that has the WhatsApp facility. It doesn't make any difference. He doesn't look at it at all. There is an upside to it, because that gives him time. And he's an avid reader. He reads. Not just reads. Many of us read. But when he reads, he wants to pass that message on to others. He keeps those books around. He wants people to read. And this is one of his strengths, and it's a strength that has taken a lot of us to great heights. And we thank him for that. It's an important thing, this reading part. And this reading part comes in from the beginning of the MYM. The MYM in its heydays used to have the halqas. Regular weekly meetings. You meet, read the Quran, you translate it, and you discuss it to see how does it impact on us, what does it mean. Read the hadith, and then you have to read something else. They used to make us read the movement books. I was my father had introduced me to movement in the sense of Leopold Weiss. I used to read his work, brilliant. But I didn't have the movement books. They introduced those books to us. And this is what created this enormous reservoir of activists in the Islamic field. People like Abdullah Osman, Ebrahim Baldi, Shaukat Tokan for Sansa, Ibrahim Dada for Ibrahim IDM. Islamic Youth Conference was Ibrahim Amor, Mr. Amor. And you get Sattar Ghani with the bank, Jame. Shaukat Tokan with Sanzaf. I mean, the outcome of this reading and this forming this halqa is that it created a desire in you to do something, to be productive, to be positive. We've got the potential in us, but it is not realized. It is latent. And this is one of the things that the movement has done, which we have lost. We need to bring this back. Our next generation, we're giving them lectures, we're giving them talks, we invite them here, but we're not making them read. We're not making them talk what we're reading. If we only can bring that back, we can bring back the dynamism of the movement which created all these organizations, Islamic organizations that we have today, whether it's IMA, whether it's As-Salam, whether it's IDM, what do you call it? So many other organizations, I can't even remember what they're, but Ajami and all of them. Some of them have died, many of them still live. So if nothing else, this is something which I'm very, very grateful to you for that, and I think we all must remember that. If we can only bring this back, we can start recreating an ummah that we need so desperately, inshallah. I think I'll leave it at that. I'll save you.
I think that aspect of Ebrahim is a very unique aspect about reading. And we know that the first revealed word was Ikra, to read. And today our source of education is YouTube, WhatsApp, Facebook. That's not reading. Reading means you got to read, not look at social media all the time. That's not reading. Reading is reading books and getting to know these books well. And I think that's something that MYM imbibed in us. And the younger generation of people, or rather older generation of people, were avid readers, and they made us read as well. Our next speaker is Dr. Professor Ghulam Wahid. Ghulam, again, needs no introduction. He's a prolific academic. He's written numerous books, and he's busy writing a book on the MYM at the moment. And I had borrowed some of the information and pictures from him. So Ghulam will just say a few words, and then I'm going to pick on the audience to say a few words. So better get your thoughts in order. Okay.
Assalamu alaikum. How do you talk about a man who is a walking library, Mr. Babu Jadwat? As you know, he's not a man to be trifled with, for he is not shy to point out holes in your argument. My trepidation in speaking here today is compounded by the fact that I am not what you may call an insider, as I was not a member of the MYM or any other organization. And I got to know Mr. Jadwat at the gym, where he was a regular. And I never actually saw him train. He would be reading the newspaper, drinking coffee, and engaging in deep discussions with people from all backgrounds. But he did tell me that he spent a lot of time in the gym, so he may have been training when I left. Over time, I got to know him, and as a historian, was fascinated by his anecdotal recollections of life in Durban, particularly around issues of Indians, Islam, and Muslim. Mr. Jadwat lived his life in a cauldron of the Casbah, and he was a participant in the making of this historic place. Mr. Jadwat is an inveterate storyteller who can enthrall young and old, as Dr. Ghulam Hussain pointed out. Notably, he has a memory that is a sponge. If you squeeze a little, and he can regale you with a story from the early 1960s, and you're speaking to him, and 3 hours later, if you squeeze again, he'll tell you about something from the mid-1950s. Mr. Jadwat's upbringing is key to understanding his personality, his unshakable convictions, some say stubbornness, and a willingness to act on them, irrespective of the obstacles, and his ability to fend off criticism and move on, and the way he interacts with people from all backgrounds. I mean, most of us, if we are criticized, we would have sleepless nights, but Mr. Jadwat thrives on that. And I think a lot of it has to do with his upbringing and the forces that impacted on him. So fortunately, I'm going to leave out the next part of the section because Ahmed has covered that, and which was, what has made him what he is. And a lot of it has to do with his upbringing, the kinds of people he interacted with. Many of them, went on to be outstanding soccer players that he shared his weekends with, like Stanley McTavish, was captain of the South African colored team. Ian McTavish was captain of Birya. Valiant Ali was captain of Verulam Suburbs. And Mr. Jadwat also trained with some of the great, what we call karatekas, like Solly Katrada, Tony Ebrahim, and Ian McTavish. Ahmad showed a photograph there of Mr. Jadwat with Solly Katrada, who at the time is the first non-white to get a black belt in karate. And when he went to train by Norman Robinson, they wouldn't allow him because he was black. So his boss told him to, I don't know if any of you know Solly, but he's a very fair man. So he went as a Jew. That's how he became Solly, and they allowed him to train. Also, I think his upbringing and attendance at Greyville School was very important because it exposed him to the poverty, but also he spoke about how people would pick on his religion, and in a way that created a strong Islamic identity. And there was an occasion when I think about 20 of his schoolmates wanted to beat him up, and the principal had to take him in his car to get him to safety from the school. So, yeah, and then I have another section about the local and global influences, and I think Ahmed covered that very well. So I won't go over all of that. But I think one of the issues that when you talk about, talk to Mr. Jadwat that comes through is identity of being a Muslim. And one of his concerns, it's not a new thing, it's not only today, but this loss of an Islamic identity, and he saw the MYM as a vehicle through which he could impart the message of the Quran and to cultivate an Islamic identity amongst young people, young Muslims. And he blamed this dilution of an Islamic identity on several factors. And now I'm quoting from his writings in Al-Kalam in 1976, when firstly he argued that Western materialistic values and culture were making deep inroads into our life and altering our behavior pattern and the pattern of our youth. On another occasion, he wrote that Western isms like capitalism, socialism, and communism was swaying the minds of young Muslims, and he urged that we oppose these godless and destructive ideologies. Today, we may call this decolonial thinking. And he was also concerned at the time about what apartheid was doing to people. So in 1976, he wrote, "The policy of Indianization and colorization and the enforced movement of Muslims into Indian and colored areas where they are indiscriminately housed, away from their mosque and surrounded by non-Muslims is accelerating the pace in destroying a distinct Muslim ummah. So much so that when one asked a young man his identity, he would reply, Indian or colored." So I think for him, and one of the bugbears, one of the things that really affected him is why many of the activists of the period had to join the Communist Party or the NIC or ANC, and why they could not do so through an Islamic forum and identity. The next part has also been largely covered, so I'm coming towards the end, where the people that I spoke to, like Yusuf Mohammadi, for example, or Ahmed Said Mullah, they described him as a man of action. And not only, if there was any problem, he would make sure it's sorted out. He provided the vehicles that took people around the country. When Yusuf Mohammadi would return on a Monday morning from Johannesburg, Mr. Jadwat would make sure that he's at school on time to teach. Yusuf was a teacher before he joined the MYM full-time. And it was also at his house that the first issues of Al-Kalam were published. So he was basically, Yusuf Mohammadi said that he was a mover and a shaker. He was dogmatic and would bring supporting evidence to prove his views, being very confident about what he believed. Now, as Ahmed said, there are certain issues that remain sort of problematic, like the Halakha program or, whether he was pushed out of the MYM. But these are not issues that we need to go into tonight. But others have a different view. But as long as Mr. Jadwat is alive, he will never change his assessment of those events. So over the years, Mr. Jadwat has, of course, courted controversy, including a court case with the famous Mufti. And one of the jokes during the rounds was that he's the only one who has more court cases than Jacob Zuma at the time. So I get the impression also in talking to Mr. Jadwat that he finds it very difficult to come to terms with how many of his former colleagues have moved on and now embraced what he calls the conservative version of Islam that they had been struggling against in the 1970s. But this insight has not affected his sense of optimism, his eagerness to engage with young and old, and above all, to be self-critical. He remains passionate about Islam and its place in the contemporary world, and he meets regularly, as Dr. Ghulam Hussain pointed out, with like-minded people to discuss these issues. I would say that he is a rare individual and having firm convictions that he lives up to. He is a devout Muslim, has a strong Islamic identity, but he's also open to people of all faiths and colors, which is also a very rare thing today because so many of us are getting into lagers. He is a voracious reader with a deep appreciation of Islamic history. Finally, it has been my honor to be able to talk about Mr. Jadwat, a man who had a profound influence on a generation of young people and multiple organizations, a man of the street and the scripture. Thank you.
There were some people that were unable to attend the function today, but they've sent voice notes. So the first voice note I'm going to play is by Professor Ebrahim Musa. Ebrahim Musa is a Maulana, is a graduate of Deoband and Nadwatul Ulama in India. And of course, he then went on to do academic studies, PhD, and he's now the Professor of Islamic Studies at Notre Dame University. So he sends the following clip, and he asked me to play it for this meeting. This is Ebrahim Musa, okay? I'll play it now.
Assalamu alaikum wa
Can you hear
rahmatullahi
it?
wa barakatuh. I'm sending this voice note as a way to
Can you
share
hear the back?
with Ebrahim Jadwat and all the brothers and sisters who have gathered with him to celebrate his great contribution to the Islamic movement in Southern Africa, in Africa, and globally. Ibrahim, you have done an amazing job with all the talents and gifts Allah has given you, and you have served your community. May Allah accept all your actions, your deeds, and your continuing activities for the sake of this ummah. Ibrahim, in all the various ways I have known you, I always remember you as someone for whom the term ummah is very important. And you always are concerned about the progress of the ummah, the success of the ummah, that the burdens of the ummah be reduced in one way or the other. And it fits beautifully with your name, in that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Inna Ebrahim kana ummatan. In other words, it means that Ibrahim was a ummah by himself. In other words, he had aspirations of building an ummah. He was, an ummah can also mean Ibrahim was obedient. And so, with that amazing name that you have, a name that both of us share, may Allah, you have done great things with your name. May Allah give you greater success, inshallah. And I just want to say what a momentous occasion it is that your friends, your brothers, sisters, your community in Durban had this wonderful idea to celebrate your gifts and your accomplishments with you. And may this be a day that you will always remember how your friends honor you. Being honored by your friends is one of those wonderful occasions. And have a great day.
Jazakallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Some people who knew Ibrahim well sent a memorial message. I said, I haven't seen him for a while. And I thought I'll just read this memorial message, and at least Ebrahim knows what we're going to speak about him after he's left us. That I regret that after confirming my attendance, I'm unable to attend a memorial. Nevertheless, I think Ebrahim was a real asset to our community. I had very fond memories of my association with him. He deeply cared about Muslim youth of South Africa and drew their attention towards the study of the Quran and the noble seerah of our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He sought the active participation in the social and political life. May Allah grant him Jannatul Firdaus. I won't mention the name, but I thought that was a classic. Ebrahim, we have very fond memories of you. So also tonight we followed a Palestine theme, since today is the Global Day of Activism for Palestine. There have been many marches today. Some of us who are in this audience were part of the marches and part of the protest action that we're taking against Palestine. And we also know that South Africa has taken the historical decision to take Israel to the International Court of Justice, and of course we wait their verdict. And we know that it's not only Israel that's on trial, but also the ICJ is on trial to see whether they can fulfill their mandate of bringing justice to the Palestinian and calling out genocide for what it is. We don't live in Gaza, Gaza lives in us. We don't live in Palestine, Palestine lives in us. Their pain is our pain, their grief is our grief, their struggle is our struggle. And we make dua for the success of the Islamic resistance in Palestine, and inshallah they will defeat the forces of oppression and the forces of genocide. And Ebrahim was very passionate about Palestine as well. And in fact, in the Muslim youth movement, a very long time ago, we had also formed the Palestine Solidarity Association, but of course it fizzled out over a period of time. So Palestine was also very much part of the consciousness of people in MYM. And we always knew that the struggle for liberation in South Africa was inextricably linked to the struggle for liberation in Palestine. Now I'm going to hand the mic over to Ebrahim, and he's going to say a few words to us, and I hope they're going to be few and not too many. So you have about 20 minutes, Ebrahim.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. As-salatu was-salamu ala Rasulillah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam wa ala alayhi wa ashabihi ajma'in. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Last week I got a message from via Shoaib, I don't know where he comes from, that a message that I had passed away. So I had many condolences sent to me. But I'm alive. You're sending condolences to a live person. 3 years ago I had COVID. If you see me walking a little bit shaky, I was 7 days a week in the gym, as Ghulam Bayad will tell you. Fit, swimming, karate, judo, all these things were part of my life. But when I had COVID, then Fuad Hendricks phoned me up from Cape Town. And he said, you know, Ebrahim, I thought that you had gone, so I wrote your obituary. So I was very surprised. Anyway, I want to start off with something that is very... look, every time my dear brother Salim Badat talks to me, then he says, long stories coming. Some don't make long stories, and then Shoaib and all, they get angry at the Saturday breakfast. So I just keep quiet now, and now they talk and they don't talk. Anyway, I want to talk to you about something to pay tribute to those that came before us, rather than about me. You see, understand something. Growing up in Durban, as Ghulam Sen would tell you, we were buffeted with so many things that were hitting us. There were the nightclubs. And let me tell you, the Muslims were the biggest supporters of the nightclubs, right? And they were the best South African champion ballroom dancers. So that was one side we had. Then we had the clubs, all the clubs, and what was happening at the clubs? And they were known as Muslim clubs, the one in Riverside in particular, not far from the Sufi mosque. It was all about gambling and womanizing and boozing and all that, right? So I'm saying that growing up in Durban, these were the things that we saw. On the other hand, we saw the best of our minds had gone to Marxism. And the center of Marxism was the Warwick Avenue Triangle where they used to meet. And we stayed away from them because we learned that it was the weekends were boozing sessions. They used to feel free to drink. But they also played a role, like they had the Red Square. Red Square in Pine Street, where they used to have the rallies and big meetings. So on the one side we had these clubs, on the other side we had these nightclubs and all of the things that we go. After the Second World War, there was too much money. And so our boys went into all kinds of unda danda. Unda danda means the wrong way. Now, on the other hand, we also had some people that formed a concerned community, and that was the Orient Club. The Orient Club in Swingo was a place where Mr. Musa especially, and if Ghulam is here or if Sali Dango is here, they should write about Mr. Muhammad Musa of Victoria Furniture Mart. He was a visionary, a person that has made such a valuable contribution. So I also want to talk about the period paying the tribute to those that came before us. And who came before us? When we came into South Africa, now we want to leave the Cape as a very special case, because no way in the world where they took slaves did Islam survive. From West Africa, East Africa, mostly slaves went and they were Muslim, but Islam never survived. The only place where they survived was in Cape. And Cape was a place, and it's a study on its own. But in Natal and Transvaal, what we had here, a very important thing that happened. Those that came to South Africa, the first thing they did as soon as they could was to establish masjids and madrasas. So every little town, village and dorpi had a masjid. That's the first thing they did. This is at the turn of the century. So isn't that a great tribute to a people of the past, that they set up these institutions, and the madrasas served as schools. So in the mornings, they were schooled, in the afternoon. For example, Pine Street Madrasa, Verulam Madrasa, Stanger Madrasa, all of these were schools in the morning, and later on they became madrasas. You know. The other thing that we find is that those that came before us had a love for knowledge. They were hungry, really hungry for knowledge. You cannot believe this. I never saw it anywhere else. So from the earliest times, they invited people from all over the world to come and talk to us. One of the first people, and I don't know one before that, one of the first people was Maulana Abdul Alim Siddiqui, a very famous man, the man that was later the father-in-law of Maulana Fazlur Rahman Ansari. But Maulana Abdul Alim Siddiqui came in the 40s and the 50s, had a great impact. But the hunger for knowledge also brought people from different parts of the world. So growing up in Durban, I learnt about the Kamal study group. I still don't know what it's about. But there was a Kamal study group. And it from Professor Kamaluddin, maybe Ghulam Sen would know about that, before my time. But Kamal study group. And then there was a Iqbal study group. And a whole lot of study group. And then the Basme Adab. So people came from all over to South Africa and addressed us. So we were hungry for knowledge, and part of that hunger was satisfied by people that came and visited us. One of them, I'm going to come back to Muhammad Musa, and we'll go back again. Muhammad Musa was a visionary, a pioneer. He also established the Natal Muslim Council. And there are 3 or 4 publications. I would, if you could ever, if I was asked Ghulam Wahid and this thing, to reprint those things, the vision the man had. At that time, he wanted to make a Darul Uloom, a South African Darul Uloom, based on our experiences and the knowledge that we have. Not the Darul Ulooms from India, who were no context, right? So that was one of his ideas. The other one was, he wanted to make an Eton College on the Bluff. That didn't work out, but we ended up with Orion School. So Muhammad Musa was also, my father told me that as a young man, whenever he could, he would go to Muhammad Musa's house in Cato Manor. He had a huge library and he used to read there. So Muhammad Musa is a man that we could learn a lot from and we should recognize. And he was also responsible for establishing Ahmad Didat. Not many people know. Ahmad Didat was working for Mr. Musa, Victoria Fari Jamaat, and when he wanted to set up the IPC, it was Mr. Musa that gave the 2-year salary for Ghulam Sen Banker and Ahmad Didat. So we find that the people like him. The other thing that happened, and I want to make this clear, there was a man by the name of Joseph Perdue who came as a Frenchman. He came to South Africa and Mr. Musa accommodated him at his guest house in Cato Manor. Joseph Perdue was brilliant and he knew the Quran very well. And so on Sundays, I don't know if Ghulam went to any of his lectures. You went, so you can tell us about it. The hall was packed. And people came from Newcastle, Ladysmith, Stanger, Port Shepstone, from all over they came, right? Now, in the 2 or 3, I'm not sure how many years, again, this was before my time, and what do I know? So, when he passed away, and when he passed away, 2 organizations came through Joseph Perdue. One was the Arabic Studies Circle, and the other one was IPC. So 2 important organizations that influenced the community here, and especially in my time. So Ghulam, Marhum Dr. Dawood Mal, he was a unique person. At the time when doctors, it's a strange thing, right? The doctors and the intellectuals and the intelligent people distanced themselves from Islam. Will you believe it? They kept away. But Dr. Dawood Mal started the Arabic Studies Circle. And I started and joined the Arabic Studies Circle as a young man when I was in high school. Through the Arabic Studies Circle, I came into contact with people like Mr. Agji, Marhum Ghulam Sen, Vanka, and others, right? And through them also, we came into contact. We came into contact with international people. So one of the first people that Dr. Mal invited was Yusuf Ibish from Lebanon, right, in the early 60s. The other one that came, invited by, and I'm open to correction, the local family, was Sheikh Basit from Egypt. And he drew thousands of people, very inspiring. So the speakers that came and the people that joined us at the time. So growing up in Durban, we found that there are people who had very big, important role to play, right? While on the one side, we were pulled away by people who were drawing us to Marxism, people that were drawing us. The other thing that we found is that there was no identity. And look, whatever I say, I'm open to correction. But no identity. If you ask a Muslim, what are you? I'm Indian. Ask a Malay colored, I'm colored, right? So the identity factor was gone, right? And so when Ahmad Sakar came, I'm jumping a little bit, one of the themes that we had on our lecture tour throughout the country and the convention, I'm a Muslim first, a Muslim last and a Muslim forever. So wherever we went, wherever the lectures were, wherever it happened, that was our theme. So we were very, very, very touched, right, by the fact that the impact of Ahmad Sakhar in this particular thing, beginning with everything else, where Muslim first, Muslim last. So the Islamic identity was there. The other thing was that, you see, there was no opportunity for people to study and learn. So Arabic Studies Circle took the opportunity. Some of it was mentioned here, but I think there were 5 people that went. Dr. Mal sent them to Azhar, right, to study at Azhar. And it's very, very important to understand at the time, who were our scholars? Why did we not have the scholars that were here, with good exception, by the way? And one of them was Abdurrahman Ansari, an inspiration to us, and a man that used to have his Quran classes. So there were people here, largely the talks were in Urdu, we didn't understand, and there was no context. So there was no opportunity for us. The other thing that bothered us as young people at the time was that if Islam is a way of life, if we say Islam is a way of life, where is it in economics? Where is it in medicine? Where is it in science? Where is it in education? There's nothing like that. And I'm going to make a claim which I want you to bear with me. There were no institutions. I'm using the word no institution, other than masjid, madrasa, and gorba. You know what gorba? Burying the dead, right? So there was no institutions. And I mean that, go check it up. Before the MYM, we didn't have any institution. We didn't have the South African National Zakat Fund. We didn't have, I remember sitting with Ebrahim Dada in 1976, I think it was, in Ladysmith we have a convention. And Ebrahim Dada had finished his studies. And he's telling me, Ebrahim, time has come for me to leave and do the work full time. And today, I don't know how many, but I think we have about 70 or 80 Islamic centers in the black townships. Can you imagine? So many, right? The other thing that we had, when we started the MYM, the first person that we invited, and remember it was not local, not Durban, it was not Natal, it was national, right? From the beginning. So we invited people that came to us from every part of the country. And that's how we brought people like Fuad Hendricks, Rashid Omar, Farid Chonara, and all these people from the rest of the country to spend time with us in Durban. The other thing that we had, one of the first things that we had to set up a structure, that we had no experience. We knew nothing. I'm telling you, we knew nothing. So when at the convention, Maulana Fazlur Rahman Ansari had raised our hope, had inspired us, had moved us, had took us on another level. But the nuts and bolts of setting up structures and organizations, that he didn't come with. I remember at the end of the convention, when he gave his last speech, and he gave us a very inspiring speech, and he gave us a set of challenges that we had to try and implement. And he asked, who is going to do it? And he said, it's you Muslim youth who are going to do it. Right, that was 72. When that finished, Yusuf Muhammadi and Marhum Haji Ebrahim Ahmad came together with me and made a commitment to serve the dawah. And until the day he passed away, Marhum Ebrahim Ahmad served the dawah. And Yusuf Muhammadi is still busy with everything. So we find that people came together. And I want to touch on something. You see, the people that brought us towards Islam were people like Dr. Mal and Ahmad Didat. Dr. Mal, with his colleagues, and especially my friend, colleague, and my mentor, Ismail Manjra, they were very, very moved by the fact that we took up this cause. And when the students came back from Azhar, they established a school, and my father took us out of the madrasas and the school was established at Anjuman in the afternoon. So we learned Quran, we learned Hadith, and also while these people were in Cairo and in Azhar, they also came into contact with Ikhwan people. Now I'm going to keep jumping from here to there. When Ismail Manjra had signed to write the book on the Arabic Study Circle, and what's the name? Shamil Jepi approached me and said, look, he is attributing the formation of the MYM to the Arabic Study Circle. In other words, Arabic Study Circle is responsible, right? And me in particular. And I said, we can't do that. There were three people. Right? One was Marhum Mahmoud Musa, whose photograph you saw. What a man, what a great man. His business at that time, in the 50s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, they had a 7-seater plane. So they were flying all over the East Africa, Central Africa, and part of the place they went to was Egypt, where supplying them with cotton. And there he came, he met the people of Ikhwan. I was much younger than him, but my family was doing business with the enterprise clothing. But he came into contact with Ikhwan, and especially with a man whose name was Professor Shawabi, who was a professor at the university. And they made a pact that they'll come from Cairo to Cape, and we must go from Cape to Cairo. Anyway, Marhum Mahmoud Musa came quite independently, right, with this idea of Ikhwan and other things. The other person, my colleague, Hafiz Abu Bakr, had spent time with me in Durban. We were in school together. When he finished matric, he went to Cape Town for a year, to what you might call classic, making his door. And there he came into contact with some very important people. One was Sheikh Saleh Din, a very, very enlightened man, Sheikh Saleh Din, Sheikh Abu Bakr Najjar, and others. And of course, the person that he drew very close to was Dr. Hussein Kotwal, who formed the Muslim Assembly. So in November 1970, I'm just jumping from here to there. November 1970, when we came together, so I was telling Shamil Jepi, you can't say that it is Arabic Study Circle and me only, but Marhum Ismail saying, but you are the person. I said, no, I'm nothing. We are three of us. Together we did it. So when I look back on that particular time, we find that people that he met in Cape Town had an impact on him. Right? There was Sheikh Najjar, and one of the great scholars was Saleh Din in Cape Town, Sheikh Saleh Din, and others, right, and Dr. Kotwal especially. So in November 1970, when we were ready to launch the MYM, we invited Hussein Kotwal to come and launch as a guest speaker. And his topic, very inspiring man, his topic was the road builders. Who will be the road builders to Allah so humanity can traverse on it? So this is one of the things that happened. Now, growing up again in Durban, there was no vacuum. We grew up with all these people. While the parties were calling us, and the nightclubs were calling us, and the Marxists were calling us, at the same time, we had these people calling us. And especially my colleague, friend, and Arabic Studies Circle, Ismail Manjra and Dr. Mal, were very inspiring in their time. And one of the early things that they did was, together with IPC, they made the 1400th anniversary of the Quran. And it was done at Curry's Fountain. And it was a very big event. So with Ahmad Deedat in Durban, inspiring people about his lectures, what was the thing that attracted people to Ahmad Deedat and what he was saying? You see, there was a problem with the colonialists. Wherever they went, they tried to remove the organization structures and faith of people. So they targeted the Muslims. right? And they had an agenda.
There's going to be road sitting at 10 o'clock.
Okay,
So we can eat also this Salah. So maybe round up in the next few minutes.
okay, you see, long talks. So what happened was that when we made it, okay, I'm getting off my way. So in the time that we were talking about, Dr. Mal had also invited Marhum Ismail Farooqi, the first time, who was responsible for setting up the Islamic Studies department. And Farooqi was a giant of a scholar. His Encyclopedia of Islam you have to read, together with his wife Lamia al-Farooqi. And some South Africans had gone to study there. One of them is Abdul Qadir Tayyib, right, in Cape Town. And there are others as well. So my point is this, that I'm going to end up now and then decide whether you want me to carry on with some things or not, and you can ask me questions. Yes, you can't cover this subject unless, but I want to show you a photograph. This is a photograph that was taken at As-Salam with Ahmad Saqqar in the middle, right? First convention. This is a photograph of Marhum, who knows him? Ahmad Saqqar. When we finished the convention, at the end of the convention, we went around the country delivering lectures. One of the key things that we had, because we had no idea of what to do, but we were going around the country delivering lectures. And Ahmad Saqqar went around the country, and when we finished here, he asked us to accompany him to Mauritius. And this book is dedicated to that 1973 visit to Mauritius, the 36-hour blitz. And I'm telling you this with humility. We changed the country. We made an impact. That's why this book was written by one of the people that were there at that time, right? And each one of them, there is a story to tell. How Ahmad Saqqar affected us. When we were on a high, spiritual, emotional high, we didn't know what to do. So when Ahmad Saqqar came as our second guest of the convention, remember, we had no experience, no organization. We were basically in the dark about a lot of things. And Ahmad Saqqar brought to us the organizations that they had in America. The Association of Muslim Accountants and Lawyers, from which Amal came. The Association of Islamic Medical Association, all these things. One of the other things that we did, right, and Yusuf Muhammadi was always a part of everything until he went to As-Salam. One of the other things is that we were very keen on media. So right from the beginning we had a newsletter, which then became a bigger newsletter, and it became an insert in Views and News with late Ismail Mir. And then Yusuf Nazir came from Johannesburg and we made the Al-Qalam, right? The other thing, media was a very important thing because we were being attacked day and night by a coterie of Indian journalists who were in the newspapers. And if there was an accident, a Muslim caused the accident. If somebody stole a pair of shoes, the Muslim stole it. It was a campaign against Islam. So I still remember we took a group of people and we went to go and see the editor of the Natal Mercury, Mr. Wiley. I can't forget that. And Mr. Wiley told us, he listened to us and he fixed the problem, right? Like you Arabs and terrorists and all that. So he said, but where have you people been? We never see you. We don't know who you are. He said, if something nice was said about Jews or Israel, the next day 20 meetings held. You didn't say something about this. You didn't say, but where have the Muslims been? You're never around. You never talk to us. We don't know who you are. Right? So journalism became one of the things. And Yusuf Nazir and his brother-in-law, Farooq Khan, we set up the journalism school. Right? So a number of people were trained in the journalism school. The other thing that we felt strongly at the time when the media was, radio was becoming aware, and I'm glad my friend Professor Ahmad Bigji is here, because we set up the first radio station, right? Ahmad Bigji, myself, and a few people, And because we had a 30-day thing, and our student and second secretary of the MYM was Riaz Jamal. So at some point we took the project, and at that time Sayyidun Nisa was in charge of the madrasa and everything, and we took the project to Riaz Jamal, who was our student and second secretary. So he took up the project. We only had a 30-day license twice a year, and they spent a lot of time, effort, and set up the radio station. Ours was called Azania Radio, identifying, but they called it the Al-Ansar Radio. So I'm going to stop here because but I want to tell you there were a lot of unfinished projects. For example, I remember that we needed to put up a center, and we had a big project for it, but unfortunately that didn't come about. But then we wanted to set up a campsite, a permanent training center, because we saw the effect of the camps and so forth. So I'm going to stop here, and if you have questions to ask or until the lights come off, feel free.
Jazakallah khairan, Ebrahim. Jazakallah very much. I think that was a wonderful context in which Ebrahim operated in, and also gives us a deep insight into historical circumstances which led to the formation of the MYM and all the other movements. Our concern is that there may be load shedding at 10 o'clock, which is why I had to cut you short. I believe I promised you that's the only reason and no other reason. I think
questions.
We have a lot to learn from you, but I think the food is getting cold. There may be load shedding. I now have the pleasure of doing the last part of the program, and I'm going to call upon Yusuf Patel and Jamila to do the awards to Ebrahim and his wife Rashida. So I'm going to call upon Yusuf Patel to please award Ebrahim on behalf of the Islamic Forum a small token of appreciation for all that you've done for us. And I'm going to ask Jamila to do so, to give the award to Rashida Mal, who will accept it on behalf
Rashida
of
Jadwat.
Rashida. Sorry, Nasima Mal, sorry, apologies. Yeah, she's going to accept it on behalf of Rashida Jadwat. I hope that the name is right. Yusuf. And Jamila will give it to Nasima Mal to pass it on to Rashida on our behalf.
Sorry, there's 3 more awards.
Okay, there's 3 more awards. There's 2 more.
3 more. One is for Ghulam Hussain.
So one to Ghulam Hussain. There's 2 more awards.
One is for Ghulam Zahid.
Ghulam Zahid.
The last one is for Ahmed Manjua for having put the whole thing together.
How are you?
We'll now close off with a dua. And of course, hopefully the lights won't go off. We expected load shedding to happen at 10 o'clock. But if lights don't go off, feel free. There's food available here. We will be making Isha Salah downstairs when the adhan goes, probably in the next 20 or 30 minutes. But please feel free to partake of the goodies that we prepared for you. And I'll ask Muhammad Wada, our chef, to make a
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم إنا نسألك ونعوذ باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم بحق محمد يا محمود وبحق علي يا علي وبحق فاطمة يا فاطر السماوات والأرض وبحق الحسن يا محسن وبحق الحسين يا قديم الإحسان نسألك يا الله 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 اللهم انصر الإسلام والمسلمين اللهم اعز الإسلام والمسلمين واخذل الكفار والمشركين اللهم اجعلنا من جندك فإن جندك هم الغالبون واجعلنا من حزبك فإن حزبك هم المفلحون اللهم أصلح لنا في ديننا وأصلح ذات بيننا ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم اللهم أدخل على أهل القبور السرور، اللهم أغن كل فقير، اللهم أشبع كل جائع، اللهم اقص كل عريان، اللهم اقض دين كل مدين، اللهم فرج عن كل مكروب. إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على عبدك ورسولك وعلى آله وأصحابه المنتجبين. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله.